He slid the spreadsheet across the kitchen table like it was a legal document, and without looking up, he said, "I'm done carrying this family alone." That sentence. That one sentence changed everything. Not just the marriage, not just the finances, but the entire story of who held the power in that house and who had been quietly holding it all along without either of them realizing it. Her name was Claire, and she had been married to Daniel for 11 years. To anyone looking in from the outside, they looked fine. Better than fine, actually. A house in a good suburb of Columbus, Ohio. 2 kids in decent schools. Family photos on the wall with everyone smiling in coordinated colors. Daniel had a solid income as a regional sales manager, bringing home around $94,000 a year. Claire had stepped back from her marketing career when their second child was born, partly by choice, partly because the math on daycare made it feel pointless, and partly because Daniel had said, more than once, that he preferred her home, that he felt better knowing someone was there, that it made him feel like a provider. And for years, she had let that identity settle around him like a comfortable coat. The provider, the one who made it all possible. She managed the house, the kids, the appointments, the grocery runs, the school forms, the social calendar, and about 40 other invisible jobs that have no salary and no title. He managed the income. And on the surface, that arrangement looked like partnership. But underneath it, something had been shifting. Daniel had started making small comments over the past year or so. Nothing dramatic at first. Just little things. "You really spent that much at the grocery store?" Or, "Did you really need to sign the kids up for another activity?" Or the one that stung the most, "I feel like I'm the only one thinking about our financial future." Each comment landed lightly and left quietly, but they were adding up in a way that Claire couldn't name yet. Like water finding the lowest point in a room. Slow, patient, and eventually, inevitable. If this kind of story already has you leaning forward, stay with me, because what Claire did next is the part nobody talks about, and it turned out to be one of the smartest financial moves she had ever made in her life. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about real people navigating real moments of power and money, and the truth that hides inside ordinary marriages, hit subscribe right now, because what comes next genuinely surprised even the people closest to this story. The spreadsheet Daniel slid across the table was color-coded. He had actually spent time on it. Column A was his income. Column B was what he called household overhead. Column C was a new proposal, a 50-50 split of shared expenses, with each person keeping whatever remained from their own income afterward. His logic, stated plainly with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it, was that he was tired of feeling like the only one accountable for money. He wanted financial independence within the marriage. He wanted to know that what he earned beyond the shared bills was actually his. No more conversations about spending. No more asking. No more feeling like a human ATM, which was the phrase he used, and which landed in Claire's chest like something sharp. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Daniel filled the silence himself, adding that he thought this would actually be better for both of them, that it would reduce arguments, that she could find some part-time work if she needed money for her personal expenses, that it was just more honest. And then Claire said something that genuinely startled him. She said, "Okay, I think that's a great idea." He had expected pushback. He had steeled himself for tears or anger, or the kind of extended negotiation that had become their pattern. What he had not expected was immediate, calm agreement, so he double-checked. "You're serious?" And she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read and said, "Completely." What Daniel did not know, what he had stopped paying attention to, if he had ever really paid attention at all, was what Claire had been doing with her time for the past 3 years. While he was tracking his sales numbers and taking client calls and feeling the quiet weight of being the household's financial engine, Claire had been building something. Quietly. Methodically. In the margins of the life he thought he understood completely. It had started almost by accident. She'd taken a freelance content writing project for a former colleague during a slow week, just to feel useful, just to feel like herself again. It paid $400. She hadn't mentioned it to Daniel because it felt too small to bring up, and she didn't want to hear him minimize it. So she put it in a separate account she'd had since before they married. The next project paid $600. Then she started getting referrals. Then a small business hired her on a monthly retainer. Then another. By the time Daniel slid that spreadsheet across the table, Claire had a freelance income of roughly $4,200 a month, almost entirely hidden not out of deception but out of self-preservation, out of a need to have something that was entirely hers, in a life that had gradually stopped having room for that. This is exactly the kind of story that the people behind Shadowlight Stories seek out. Not because it's dramatic or extreme, but because it reveals something quietly true about how marriages can drift so far from partnership that both people end up living in entirely different financial realities under the same roof. Now here is where the story shifts in a direction that most people, hearing it, never see coming. Because Claire's agreement wasn't just calm, it was calculated. Not in a cold or manipulative way, but in the way that someone thinks when they've finally stopped waiting for someone else to see their value and started seeing it themselves. She sat down that same week with a notepad and worked out what the new arrangement actually meant in real numbers. The shared expenses Daniel had listed totaled about $3,100 a month. Mortgage contribution, utilities, shared groceries, the kids' basic needs. Split 50-50, her share was $1,550 a month. Her freelance income was $4,200. Her share of expenses left her with $2,650 every single month. That was entirely, completely, no questions asked hers. For the first time in 11 years, she had money that no one could comment on. Money that no one could audit with a raised eyebrow over the grocery receipt. Money that was simply and purely hers. Daniel, meanwhile, was running his own numbers. His $94,000 a year broke down to about $7,800 a month after taxes. His half of shared expenses was also $1,550, which meant on paper he had $6,250 for himself each month. More than double what Claire had. He felt, initially, like this had gone well for him. What he hadn't accounted for was everything that Claire had been absorbing that didn't appear anywhere on his color-coded spreadsheet. The kids' activity fees, the school supply runs, the birthday gifts for other kids' parties, the household items that wore out and needed replacing, the pediatrician copays, the small mountain of invisible spending that kept a family of 4 functioning, which had always passed through Claire's hands without ever being named as a shared expense because it had never occurred to Daniel to name it, because he had never been the one doing it. When those costs redistributed, when Claire, now operating on a strict personal budget with her own money, started saying, "That comes out of the household account, not mine," Daniel started seeing line items that had never appeared before. It was not that Claire became difficult, it was that the invisible became visible. The unpaid labor that had disguised itself as love and willingness and capability was now, for the first time, appearing as an actual cost. And the number, when fully accounted for, was considerably larger than Daniel had imagined. There's a concept in economics sometimes called the shadow economy of the household, the enormous value of unpaid domestic labor that never enters GDP calculations, never appears on a tax form, and almost never appears in a marriage budget until the person doing it stops absorbing it silently. Researchers at various institutions have tried to calculate what a full-time stay-at-home parent would earn if each task were compensated at market rate: childcare, meal prep, household management, scheduling, emotional labor, transportation. Estimates run anywhere from $50,000 to over $100,000 annually, depending on the study and the household. Daniel had been receiving that for 11 years. For free, because it came wrapped in a relationship and therefore felt like it cost nothing. That is not a small thing to suddenly see clearly, and to his credit, and this part of the story matters, Daniel did eventually see it. Not immediately, not without friction. There were tense weeks where the new arrangement felt like a cold war neither of them had officially declared. There were conversations that started as arguments and ended somewhere more honest. There was one night, about 6 weeks in, where Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a notepad of his own, trying to track where his discretionary money was going, and he looked up at Claire and said quietly, "I think I've been doing the math wrong for a long time." And that sentence was the real turning point. Not the spreadsheet, not the proposal, not even Claire's quiet, steady, okay, that had startled him so much. It was Daniel sitting with the actual numbers and realizing that the story he had told himself about who carried this family had been missing an entire chapter, a very long, very important chapter. They didn't rebuild overnight. Real things rarely do, but they hired a financial counselor who worked specifically with couples, someone who helped them build a shared budget that actually reflected shared labor and shared sacrifice rather than just shared expenses. Claire kept her freelance work. She expanded it, actually, eventually bringing in close to $6,000 a month by the time their youngest started school. Daniel stopped using the phrase, "I'm the only one thinking about our financial future," because he no longer believed it was true. What this story really comes down to is not money. It's not even marriage exactly. It's about visibility, about how easily the things we do and the value we bring can become invisible inside the structures we live in. Whether that structure is a marriage, a workplace, a family, or a community. And it's about what happens when one person, instead of fighting to be seen, quietly builds something of their own in the space they've been given. Claire didn't demand Daniel see her value. She built proof of it. And then, when the moment came, she simply let the numbers speak. There's something in that approach worth sitting with. Not because every situation calls for quiet strategy. Sometimes the right move is to speak directly, loudly, and immediately. But because there's a specific kind of power in knowing your own worth before you need anyone else to acknowledge it. In having something that is yours before the conversation that requires it even begins. Here's what I want to ask you. And I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation, in a relationship or a workplace or anywhere, Where your contribution became invisible to the person who benefited most from it? Where the value you brought simply wasn't counted because it didn't come with a number attached? Drop your experience below, because I have a feeling this story touched something that more people understand than are willing to admit out loud. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone in your life who might be carrying more than anyone is counting, share this with them. Not just as a story, but as a reminder. A reminder that invisible does not mean unimportant, that quiet does not mean powerless, that the person doing the math wrong is not always the one without the spreadsheet. The most dangerous assumption in any relationship is the belief that what you don't pay for costs you nothing.